Welcome to Brown Bag History for May 29th, 2024. This year is the 100th anniversary of Revelstoke Golf Club, so we wanted to talk about that today. As we start, we acknowledge that the land around Revelstoke and on the Columbia River and its tributaries is the Sinixt homeland and traditional territory. We acknowledge the ties of the Secwepemc, the Okanagan Nation Alliance, and the Ktunaxa to this land. We acknowledge our use and inhabitation of this land sacred to these four nations. We respectfully honor their traditions and culture. So let's start with the history of the Columbia Park area where the golf course is located. It was actually called Columbia Park. And in 1898, there was a group of local citizens who were trying to apply for parkland in the area, and they looked at several sites. One of them was actually Williamson's Lake, because Mr. Williamson had actually offered to allow some of his farmland to be used for park purposes. But at that time, it was felt that it was too far out of town. So they looked for other places around town, and they settled on the Columbia Park. They said, your committee recommends a site lying along the Columbia River, north of the Farwell town site, comprising blocks 52 to 56 and part of 57, lying between the above blocks and the Columbia River. The ground is about the same altitude as the old town of Revelstoke and practically level. There is no rock on the surface and not much fallen timber or heavy standing timber. The area mentioned is triangular in shape and contains about 50 acres. So in September of 1898, the Columbia Park was granted to the committee on the proviso that the land be transferred to the municipality upon incorporation. Of course, that happened in March of 1899, so it was turned over to the city as parkland. And it was a popular picnic spot. And then in 1908, there was a local group called the Revelstoke Turf Association, and they were running horse races, but they didn't have a race course, so they used to run the races down on Front Street and Douglas Street. But the business owners were complaining about all the dust that was kicked up by the horses, so they applied for the use of the land in Columbia, in part of Columbia Park, and they built a grandstand and stables and developed a racetrack there. Actually, a man who came here from England has a jockey, and he was a jockey at some of the race courses. There's a picture of the grandstand around 1910, so it's quite a substantial building. The first fall fair was held in September 1908, and as well as the races, they had a lot of it was a regular fall fair, so they had judging of livestock, poultry. It was actually a very active poultry association in town. They loved their chickens. One of them was Roy Smythe, who just took their kitty corner across the street there, who was a breeder and shower of poultry. And so they would have the annual fall fairs. And then and this is at the first fall fair in 1908, they actually used the SS Revelstoke to get people up to the fairgrounds, and they had a little dock that they stopped at there to let people off, and other people came by horse and buggy or walked into the area. But there's some people arriving on the SS Revelstoke for the first fall fair, and there was a whole page spread in the newspaper, sometimes even more than a full page spread, with all the lists of the winners. It was quite a big deal at the time, and of course they had categories for like art, and crocheting and lace making and knitting and canning and flower arrangement and pretty much everything. So they in 1912 they had agricultural hall and actually a poultry building built as well for the fall fairs. It was designed by architect W. Wallace and built by O.W. Abrahamson, who is a local contractor. He also built the high school that's now Old School Eatery. He built the old brick hospital, quite a few quite a few other buildings in town. It cost $10,000 to build at the time. And so this was built in 1912. In 1914, World War I started in August, and the committee decided that they would not hold a fall fair that year. And we all know now the war dragged on for 4 years. That was really the end of the fall fairs and the horse racing in Revelstoke. It really put an end to that. In 1912, they actually had a ceremony to do the start of the auto road to Mount Revelstoke. This was even before Mount Revelstoke was proclaimed a national park, but a local committee decided that they wanted to see a road built to the summit. And they actually did sort of the first start at Columbia Park. Of course, later on when it was built, the start was farther up the Big Bend Highway. But this was the original start of the auto road. And that August 21st was a busy day. They'd actually, in the morning, they had a cornerstone laying for the brick Queen Victoria Hospital, and Thomas Taylor was at that. Just as an aside, we actually, last year, we acquired the trowel that he used to lay the cornerstone at the hospital. It's on display downstairs right now. And so this is Thomas Taylor, who is our MLA, giving a speech. So this was his second speech of the day. Their speeches were always long-winded. And if you look over here, you can see a couple of guys that have their heads sort of turned a bit. It looks like they could possibly be nodding off, which wouldn't be surprising to having to listen to two speeches. And he wouldn't have been the only one giving a speech either. A lot of people would have been doing that. So anyway, that was the opening of the auto road. And this was the post that they planted for the first shovel of dirt for what they planned to be the auto road. So see, it was planted August 21st, 1912. This photograph was taken quite some time later by Estelle Dickey. It's there. Yeah, it's still there. I'll show you it being unveiled a little later. So in January of 1917, the city regained full control of Columbia Park and the buildings on it. And in early April 1924, there were golf enthusiasts in town, said they'd set up a temporary 6-hole course near a local sawmill and were planning to organize and ask the city council for a permanent site. And I haven't been able to figure out exactly where that location was. But in April 9th, 1924, the Revelstoke Golf Club was organized at a meeting at the office of S.G. Robbins, who was a local insurance agent. Dr. A.L. Jones, who is pictured here, was named the president, and he held that position continuously through 1933, and then again from 1937 to 1939. He was a medical doctor, also had a distinguished war record as well, both First and Second World Wars. And then there were other local people on the committee. Another doctor, Dr. Strong, was the chairman of the grounds committee from 1924 until he left Revelstoke in 1937. So at the very beginning, in April of 1924, they had started with 30 members of the club. And they planned to open a 6-hole course at once and to extend it by the end of the season to a 9-hole course. So in the middle of April, they had a delegation of golf enthusiasts headed by Mr. T.R. Jones, waited upon the council and with a request for the use of the agricultural grounds for a golf course. And Mr. Jones pointed out the value of a course as an advertisement to the city, as tourists would often stop over in a town if it happened to have a golf course. And so they received approval for the use of the grounds on a yearly basis. And then in the end of May, the ladies section was organized at a meeting held at the home of Mrs. Strong, and Mrs. A.L. Jones, Dr. Jones' wife, was the president, and the secretary treasurer was Mrs. Whitehead. And they actually, their organizational meeting was exactly 100 years ago today. So in a lot of the unfortunately, we don't have a lot of photographs going right back to the 20s. So I've just got a lot of the early photographs that we do have available, sort of illustrating the talk as we go through. So in 1924, the membership was $10 per person, or $17 for 2 adults in the family, and a $5 junior membership for any child attending school. Most of the work of preparing the course was done by volunteers. Mr. Thomas Griffiths, who had a farm in Big Eddy, with a team of horses, were hired to clear the land. The racetrack, which is still there, came into play on 6 fairways. The ladies worked on making the agricultural hall usable as a clubhouse. So the clubhouse that's there today is still that 1912 agricultural hall. They did a lot of fundraising to get the club up and running and to get the clubhouse fitted up. They had an afternoon tea in the King Edward Hotel, and then started an annual golf club dance in the Masonic Hall, which is that was located right where Trail Tire is now, not the same building. There was a note there was a little editorial column in the papers at that time by columnist who used the name Papyrus. And so he had a little column about golfing starting in Revelstoke. He said, "The golf bug has surely begun its deadly work. While the grown-ups chased a little white ball all over the exhibition grounds, the younger fry are busy imitating them. I saw an exciting game being played in a backyard the other day. The young players used a piece of lead pipe for a golf club, and they showed remarkable skill in handling their crude driver. For what attracted my attention to their game was the swish of a golf ball as it passed my car, rather too close for comfort. The game is surely going to be a big boost for Revelstoke and ought to lead to a large increase in the sale of glass." So the minutes of the golf club, which we have going right back to the beginning, from June of 1924, mentioned the green fees. So the local residents would be allowed to play on the course if introduced by a member on each occasion for 3 times free, and 3 times by paying a green fee of 50 cents per day, after which they would have to pay the usual membership fee. Introducing members must be responsible for entering the visitors in the visitors book and also for the green fees. There were no fees for bona fide visitors residing outside a 20-mile radius. There was an article in the paper reproduced from the Financial Post talking about golf as an investment. Said there were twice as many golf links in Canada as before the war. There were $25 million was invested in land built and buildings used by golf clubs in Canada. At that time, in 1924, there were 350 golf clubs in Canada, most in Ontario, with 25 in British Columbia. In 1925, the city passed a bylaw for a 10-year lease of the 46-acre property. The bylaw passed 212 to 33, so there's quite a bit of support for the new club. The newspaper said, "It is altogether probable that a lease of Columbia Park will be given to the golf club by the council, in which case the city will be spared any further expense in respect to this property, such as insurance on buildings and general upkeep. The golf club, if given the lease, contemplate improvements from year to year, putting the course into first-class shape for this increasingly popular sport." And Mayor McKinnon stated that the city reserved the right to fix the fees of the club, precluding thereby any exclusive use of the course. He stated that there was no intention to interfere with the picnicking ground known as Columbia Park. And the club actually announced that if they were advised of any date on which Sunday school or other picnics were being held at Columbia Park, the golf club would forego using the park for golf on those days, leaving the grounds open for any sports as maybe put upon at the picnic. So if they were wanting to do, three-legged races or whatever races, they would have the space available to them. So they were able to, the different user groups were able to get along just fine. The first hole-in-one was recorded on May 1925. It was made by Jack Hamilton on the fourth hole. And Jack Hamilton was the son of Dr. J.H. Hamilton. He also became a doctor himself, but he was born in Revelstoke in about 1911 or so. In 1926, the local club joined the Interior Golf Association, and they had their first ladies' days held in 1929. They originally chose Fridays as the ladies' day. In May 25th to 27th in 1931, the BC Interior Golf Association Championship was held in Revelstoke for the first time. That time it was men only who were golfing in the tournament. They had a complimentary banquet for the visiting golfers at the King Edward Hotel. And said the Kamloops golfers took most of the honors. The new interior champion was Fred Irwin of Kamloops. The third flight went to W.A. Sturdy of Revelstoke, winning over S. Mars of Revelstoke. So after the tournament, they had a novelty event, doing a drive across the Columbia River north of the bridges. Said many valiant golfers attempted to span the 300-yard gap, but only Fred Irwin of Kamloops made the grade. He sacrificed the ball that had won him the championship title, but won the admiration of his fellow competitors and a substantial prize at the hand of Mr. Meeker by his singular feat. Locals drove visiting golfers around the city and up Mount Revelstoke National Park. That was whenever anybody visited, somebody had to drive them up to Mount Revelstoke National Park. It was really sort of the showpiece of the town. And the ladies of the club served refreshments in the clubhouse during the tournament. So they had over 65 people attending the banquet at the King Edward Hotel. Their first Labor Day tournament was held in 1931, and men only at that time again. But as of this year, it'll be the 93rd anniversary of the Labor Day tournament. Member clubs in the Men's Interior Golf Association were invited to the tournament. And in 1933, a competition for the Hotel Keepers Cup was incorporated into the Labor Day events. I'll talk about that cup in a minute. Vernon, Kamloops, and most interior courses had sand greens for many years. Revelstoke had grass greens from the beginning. And so that accounted for the popularity of the course for tournaments. In 1932, they held a commercial travelers tournament for the first time in May. Commercial travelers were salesmen who would travel from community to community with their products, taking them to the local merchants and showing them what they had available for purchase. So they actually had a tournament for the commercial travelers. The winner in 1932 at the first one was Peter Boyd. And there's quite a few men and their wives attended, and of course they did their usual entertainment dance in the Masonic Hall, hosted by the club, with music provided by a band called the Serenaders. And again, the ladies section was serving refreshments throughout. They handed out prizes for that event. This is a later commercial tournament. Prizes were handed out after the 1932 tournament. Winner was Peter C. Boyd. C. Bowman was acclaimed the world's worst commercial golfer, a title which he cheerfully accepted. The world's best commercial golfer was Jack Fraser, and Bowman very generously donated a carton of groceries and a carton of other supplies to Queen Victoria Hospital. And mentioned from 1932, the stone fireplace in the clubhouse was built that year at a cost of $300. So this is the hotel keeper's trophy, and it was first presented on Labor Day for the in 1933 for the low growth score at the Labor Day tournament. The hotel keepers that are mentioned on here were H.J. McSorley, who owned the King Edward Hotel, and G. Rickson, who is Grace Rickson, who owned the Selkirk Hotel, later the Revelstoke, and now the end section of the Regent, and C.W. Turnross, who owned the Regent. They were the ones that initially donated that trophy. And the interesting story about it is that there was a note from the in 1963, in the newspaper, saying that there was a man named Joe Gotch who had he and Cal Upper had kind of a private museum south of town, and he would find things for his museum in the city dump at the end of the ballpark area, the Centennial Park. That's where the dump was, and he actually found this beaten up trophy in the dump, and it eventually made its way into the museum, into our museum. So we have it now in our collection. But it was used for quite a few years, and actually, so there's a picture that shows the printing on it. So the names McSorley, Rickson, and Turnross. And then this year, I got an email from a woman in Vernon who was asking about the hotel keeper's trophy. And she said that she had one and she didn't know why she had it or who it had belonged to. But it turned out that it had been won by her father, the Walter Lefroy of Vernon, in 1934. So she said he'd never lived in Revelstoke, so she didn't know why he had a Revelstoke trophy. But I looked up the tournament, and Walter Lefroy did win the Hotel Keepers Cup that year. So I guess with they had keeper trophies as well that they'd give to the individual winners to take home with them. So that's another little trophy, and that one I just found out about that this year. So that fun little aside on that particular trophy. The big deal in Revelstoke was in 1936 when there was a film being filmed in Revelstoke called the Silent Barrier by a company called Gaumont British, which is a film company based out of England. And the story was very loosely based on the building of the Canadian Pacific Railway. And the star of the show was Richard Arlen, who's seen on the right there on his horse on the top of Mount Revelstoke. And he was an avid golfer. So when he first came here for filming, first thing he did was scout out the local golf course. And the newspaper of July 10th, 1936 says, Richard Arlen beats record of golf course. Over the 3,100-yard, 9-hole layout of the Revelstoke Golf Club, Richard Arlen of screen fame parted a fine 34 for a total of 67 to defeat the long-standing course records of 68 by one stroke on Thursday of last week. Mr. Arlen's superb exhibition of golf was in keeping with his score and remarkable owing to his not having played since leaving England about 3 weeks ago. He planned to participate in Vancouver's golf tournament at Point Grey that summer as well. So on July of 17th of 1936, it was announced that Richard Arlen was going to present a cup to the golf club called the Arlen Cup. Newspaper said, a beautiful silver trophy standing 21 inches high arrived in Revelstoke yesterday on order from Richard Arlen, star of the Great Barrier, which is to be presented by him on behalf of the Gaumont British Picture Corporation to the Revelstoke Golf Club for annual competition. Mr. Arlen, who is a prime golfing enthusiast, was delighted when he viewed the handsome cup, which he was donating to the local club. He said, because the officers and members had been such dandy good fellows. He actually also donated a cup to the swimming and diving competitions, which were held every year at Williamson's Lake. And that trophy we have in our collection now, but we don't have the Arlen Cup. And I'm not sure whether it's still there. Maybe somebody can find that out for me at some point, or I'll have to dig into that a bit more. So the Arlen Cup was competed in the Labor Day tournament for handicap play low net. The first year it was donated in 1936. It was won by Mr. Howard of Kamloops, and the runner was Walter Hardman, who was the mayor of Revelstoke. The Ladies Interior Championships were held in Revelstoke for the first time on September 11th and 12th in 1937, with 33 players from Kamloops, Vernon, Kelowna, Salmon Arm, and Revelstoke. They did play 18 holes, so they played the course twice. And of course, they again held a banquet in the King Edward Hotel. There were 51 ladies present for that one. There was a note in 1943. It said the annual Labor Day golf tournament was held for the 12th year in a row since its inauguration in 1931. Close to 60 competitors took part, with golfers attending from throughout the interior. E.D. Wood of Three Valley carried off the Gaumont British Cup, the Arlen Cup, while Dr. A.S. Hanna retained possession of the Hotel Keeper's Trophy. So this mention of E.D. Wood, who's the man sitting on the steps here, gave me the opportunity to show this photograph of his house, which was just in that kind of swampy area just before you get to Three Valley. He had this absolutely gorgeous little English cottage down there where they lived. They did later move into town, but he was a very avid golfer. He would walk into town from Three Valley to golf, and he was also a member of the ski club. And we have a photograph from 1960 with showing Mr. Wood, age I think into his 70s, and Henry Okamura, age 1, who are the oldest and youngest members of the ski club in 1960. So that was Mr. Wood. In 1942, the world was at World War II. The Canada and the British Empire and the U.S., all of the Allied forces were at war with Japan, and all of the Japanese people who were living on the west coast of British Columbia and into the States as well were forcibly removed from their properties and sent into places in the interior. And quite a few golf courses, including Kelowna, were denying membership or playing privileges to any Japanese people. And that happened in Revelstoke. They said Japanese people, regardless of citizenship, were denied playing privileges to the golf course. So even if they were Canadian citizens, they were denied playing privilege. And they ratified that motion in 1947 after the war was over. And in 1949, they had a request from the Japanese Canadian Citizens Association that their members be allowed to play golf, and mentioned that the motion of May 13th, 1942, barring them from barring any members of the Japanese race from membership in the Revelstoke Golf Club was revoked. They were asking that motion to be revoked. And so we have the minutes of the annual meeting held in the City Hall on April 6, 1947. There were 27 members present, and they read the correspondence from the Japanese Canadian Citizens Association and had a discussion on the application. And it was moved by 2 members of the club that their application to play be dismissed. but the vote was 3 people for the motion and the rest of the people against that motion to keep the ban in place. So then they had a new motion by E.D. Wood that the motion of May 13th, 1942 be revoked. And that was seconded by another member and carried. So at that time, they did allow any Japanese persons to play on the golf course. But that ban had been in place for 7 years. In 1944, the Labor Day tournament was extended to 3 days to include a ladies' handicap event. And they had a ladies' cup donated by Earl Donaldson, who had Donaldson's Drugs on Mackenzie Avenue. In 1949, they were able to get a liquor license, and the ladies' upstairs lounge was converted to a licensed premises. They joined the BC Golf Association in 1950 and hired their first golf professional in 1951, a man named Al Nelson. In September of 1951, the club agreed to hire him for the following year at a salary of $175 per month for a 6-month period. They also decided to hire a couple to look after the clubhouse, to work on the course 4 hours a day under the direction of the pro, and to serve as steward of the club. The couple was to be paid a salary of $200 a month combined for a 6-month period. They would be live-in caretakers with free dwelling, light, and water. They would also be in charge of soft drink, tobacco, and catering concessions. And in May of 1951, a 18-hole exhibition match was to be played by Stan Leonard and Fred Wood of Vancouver, who were 2 outstanding professional golfers in Canada at the time. Stan Leonard was the 1950 Canadian winner of the Canadian Open Championship. And then they were going to be holding a clinic as well that was sponsored by the BC Amateur Golf Association. In 1951, they were affiliated with the newly organized Okanagan Mainline Golf Association. And the photograph I have here is called the Hole in One Boys, circa 1950s. Shorts Henderson, Harry McCall, Jack English, and Alf Burridge. And Jack English was Ken's uncle, and Ken's father, Jim English, told me a story of when he got a hole-in-one, and at the time, the local Catholic priest, Father Harrison, was having his 25th anniversary, and there were all these priests at the golf club, and Jim was quite worried because the tradition is if you got a hole-in-one, you had to buy a drink for everybody who was in the club at the time. And he was worried he was going to have to buy drinks for all these priests. But luckily they left before he got back to go to a banquet for Father Harrison. So he got out of having to buy a round of drinks for that many people. Where I am here. In 1954, the men's OMGA tournament was held for the first time. I think it was at the Okanagan Mainline Golf Association. And in 1954, the 31 acres to the north of the golf club were purchased for $1,800 from Mrs. Upper. And Mrs. Upper is the woman who appears here with her husband and several of their children. This house burned down in the 1930s, so that house wouldn't have been on the property at that time. But that was the original Upper property in Columbia Park. The golf club was incorporated under the Societies Act in 1954. An interesting photograph of the lawnmower, the golf club. In 1967, an agreement was reached between the City of Revelstoke, BC Hydro, and the Revelstoke Golf Club. The club relinquished the area purchased in 1954 to the city and received in exchange the property extending to the Big Eddy, plus $140,000. The actual transfer of the property took place in 1969. The upstairs of the clubhouse was completely renovated in 1968, including new washrooms, men's locker room, new bar, and additional furnace. It was done at an approximate cost of $6,000, as the labor was all volunteered by the members. This is a map that we put together quite a few years ago, showing the expanded golf course property and what had been there originally, including the racetrack and a farm owned by Jock Malcolm, and the Mountain Shadow Drive-In, which had been on the property since the early 1960s. And then there was also at the point, this is a photograph from 1920 showing an opium farm. There was a man that was growing opium poppies, and he had sunflowers sort of ringed all around the property to hide the opium poppies. But that would have been just around the time that opium was made illegal. But there was at least a couple of opium farms in this area, opium poppy farms. And this is the Jock Malcolm Farm, which is in Columbia Park. A lot of Columbia Park was farmland at that time, or up until the 60s. And there's an ad from 1962 for the Mountain Shadow Drive-In Theater, which is in that area as well. It was only in operation for a few years. Most people remember the drive-in that was at the top of the Airport Way hill. But this one, there's still a speaker post there. Okay. 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 So let's see where we are here. So in 1972, the city cleared the trees opposite the existing course for tennis courts, which were never built at that time. Craig Rutherford, who was the golf club president, brought in gravel to create a driving range. So in the land owned by BC Hydro was turned over to the city. Initially, the Snowmobile Club requested land for an oval racing track in that area, but the golf club objected, and the city offered land in the industrial park for the Snowmobile Club instead, and allowed the use of the land for golf course expansion. So in 1974, they were working on the construction of the new 9, and they hired golf course architect Norman Woods, who was a well-known Canadian golf course architect who designed courses in Manitoba, Alberta, Montana, and BC, including two that were on the current top 100 Canadian courses. The club insisted that he redesign the 8-hole first to see his work. They hired him at a cost of $150,000. 1/3 came from the province, 1/3 from the city, and 1/3 from the club. They decided to make the new 9 the front 9, feeling that people preferred to begin their round on a new course. So the official opening of the course took place on June 12th, 1976. And we have a photograph here of Mayor Sid Parker cutting the ribbon to open the new course. That looks like John Opera standing there. And at the same time, they relocated that 1912 marker, and which is still on the course now. And here's Craig Rutherford and Ruby Nobbs unveiling the marker at its new location. And they'd both been members of the golf club for many, many years. And for those who don't know, Craig and Ruby were brother and sister. They also owned the bowling alley, and Ruby operated the bowling alley for many years until she retired and decided to sort of take over things here at the museum. It was my mentor for many years. These are photographs from the newspaper showing the new course. So I'll just show these ones here. So there's an aerial view of the new 9. So these are all from 1976. It said, Pro John Pavitt's wish for the log tree stump to remain will create problems on the number 4 fairway. An aerial view from the east of showing the course. And Woods Lake. And so the club at that time in 1976 had 400 members, and they expected it to grow. The golf pro at that time was John Pavitt. He began as assistant golf pro for 4 years in England in 1949, before becoming a head pro over in England. He came to Revelstoke in 1955 as a club pro and remained for 5 years before returning to England, where he played on the European tour for a year before taking on a job as pro golf teacher for an American Air Force club golf club in France. In 1962, he moved to Arizona and remained there until he came back to Revelstoke in 1971 as club pro for a few more years. So I've got a few more photographs that we have in our collection, just some photos over the years of relating to the golf club. This are the winners of the 4th annual Tony Coffin Memorial Charity Tournament in June of 1991. Tony Coffin was mayor of Revelstoke in the 1980s and died in office in a logging accident, and they had a tournament in his memory, and there's the plaque with his photograph on it. Jess Bierling and Hector Scarcelli, the Chamber of Commerce Golf Tournament in 1991. We have a lot of photographs that came from the newspaper, the Revelstoke Review newspaper. We've been scanning those. So Rob Anderson and Bus Gerling, 1991. And there's winners of the Ladies Club Championship in 1991. Mara Jadden Mackey was the ladies Club champion, and Marion Scott won the Dorothy Lundell Trophy. Mike Feldinger, and I'm not sure what trophy that is, but it's obviously an old one. It's got a lot of plaques on it. And Jeff and Daryl Trotter and Stella and Bert Byman. There's a fair bit of hardware there. And Neil Jeffress winning the Junior Golf Award. There's Marianne Whitehead and Annette Fiocco scorekeeping. And Anthea Hughes and Mary Kwong. And Peter Miller with the golf pro Dale Bradley. Yeah, we don't have too much beyond the 1990s in our collection at this point, but so that's just a rundown of the golf course, and congratulate them on 100 years. And personally, I think it's great that they're still using that designated heritage building as their clubhouse. I'm sure it has its challenges being in a building that old, but it's nice to see that it's being preserved. So that's history of Revelstoke Golf Course. Next, Brown Bag History on June 12th, we're another 100th anniversary. The Big Eddy Bridge is turning 100. So we'll be talking about that. So thank you for coming today.